Welcome to the debate. Last year, Americans spent over $71 billion on a label. You see it pretty much every single time you enter the produce aisle.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right, so imagine you're standing there looking at two apples. They are the exact same size, the same vibrant shade of red, and they even feel identical in your hand. But the price tags tell a wildly different story.
Yeah, they really do.
One is $1. The other is $1.50. That 50-cent difference, which is, roughly a 53% premium, represents a massive and highly contentious shift in global agriculture.
It really is a staggering markup. And, well, it's not just apples. When you look at items like dairy or eggs, the premium can skyrocket up to 82%.
Wow, 82%.
Yeah. Right now, the average household's grocery budget is stretched to the absolute limit. So when you're standing in that aisle looking at those two apples, you have to ask yourself a very fundamental question. What exactly are you buying with that extra money? Precisely. And that brings us to the central question of our discussion today. Organic versus non-organic. Is the extra cost actually worth it?
Right. When I look at that 50-cent difference, I don't see a markup, really. I see a necessary correction. I view the organic premium as a justified investment in superior toxicological safety, measurable environmental regeneration, and strict ethical standards for animal welfare. In short, paying that premium is simply paying the true cost of food.
Well, I come at it from a different way. While the organic label is undeniably a powerful marketing tool, and it is, I argue that the premium often buys peace of mind rather than, meaningful, generalizable nutritional superiority.
Interesting.
And furthermore, when we look at the actual biological mechanics of organic farming, specifically its significantly lower crop yields, it presents a severe environmental trade-off regarding global land use that we simply cannot afford to ignore.
Okay. Well, to start, I think we need to fundamentally reframe how we look at that price tag. When people complain about the organic premium, they're actually, in my view, looking at the math backward.
Backward? How do you mean?
The higher cost of organic food at the register is really just the removal of the artificial discounts found in conventional farming.
Artificial discounts? I'm not sure I follow.
Well, conventional agriculture seems cheap only because it externalizes its actual costs onto society and the environment. I mean, it destroys soil health over time, pollutes local waterways with chemical runoff, and exposes both farm workers and consumers to synthetic chemicals.
Okay, but
Just to finish the thought, when you pay for organic, you are paying for measurable benefits. You're funding regenerative practices that use about 45% less energy overall. You're supporting farms that boast 34% more biodiversity. And you're doing all of this while completely avoiding the synthetic fertilizers and pesticides that define the conventional baseline.
The problem with that framing, though, is that the financial premium you pay at the register is entirely disproportionate to the actual human health and environmental benefits being delivered to the consumer.
You really think it's disproportionate?
Oh, entirely. Let's look at the data comprehensively. If we examine the massive 2012 systematic review out of Stanford, which, by the way, analyzed 223 different studies, the conclusion was incredibly stark.
Right. I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, so there is no generalizable nutritional superiority of organic food over conventional food. I mean, you might find slightly higher levels of certain antioxidants, sure, but the clinical significance of that difference is negligible.
But wait, you can't just brush past the synthetic chemicals. That's a huge part of the equation.
Regarding the pesticides, the residues found on conventional foods are strictly regulated by the EPA, and they consistently fall well below the maximum residue levels deemed safe for human consumption. But look, the most critical flaw in the organic model isn't even nutritional. It's its sheer inefficiency.
Inefficiency.
Yes, because organic farming relies on less potent fertilizers and avoids synthetic weed control. It suffers a 19 to 25% yield gap.
Okay, yes, the yield gap is real.
Right, and that means to produce the exact same amount of food globally, organic farming would require up to 84% more land. In a world facing rapid deforestation and habitat loss, that is a severe threat to global conservation efforts.
I hear you on the land use, but let's look at what that 53% premium actually buys the person eating the food first, before we tackle the global footprint.
Sure.
Are they literally ingesting a better apple or just a more expensive one? Do the chemical and nutritional differences justify the individual price tag?
If we were talking strictly about human health, I have to say no, they don't. You often hear proponents cite statistics like organic crops having up to 69% more flavonols.
Which is a significant amount.
It sounds incredibly impressive as a percentage, absolutely, but we have to ask how that actually translates to the human body.
Wait, before we move on, let's clarify that for the listener. What exactly is a flavonone and what is it doing for my body?
Oh, sure. So flavonones are a type of antioxidant found naturally in plants, particularly citrus fruits, that help protect cellular health and reduce inflammation. They are undoubtedly good for you.
Right.
But the clinical significance of getting slightly more flavonones or, say, a bit more phosphorus from an organic apple is highly debatable. The human body is remarkably adept at processing the nutrients it receives, and the baseline nutrition of a conventional apple is already excellent.
Okay, but
Nutritional epidemiologists will tell you that simply eating any fruits and vegetables, regardless of how they are grown, is vastly more important to your overall health and longevity than whether or not those vegetables carry an organic seal. The danger here is that by making organic foods seem like a medical necessity, we price lower-income families out of the produce aisle entirely.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective. I completely agree that overall vegetable consumption is the most critical baseline for public health.
Right, we agree on that.
Yeah, we shouldn't discourage anyone from eating conventional spinach if that's what they can afford. But we cannot simply dismiss the toxicological differences by focusing only on the vitamins. I like to think of this through the concept of toxic load.
Toxic load.
Yes, toxic load is a cumulative debt that your body takes on over decades of exposure. You aren't just paying a premium for a few extra antioxidants. You are paying to reduce your dietary intake of cadmium by 48%.
Okay, but cadmium...
Let me just explain the cadmium part. It's a highly toxic heavy metal that gets concentrated in soils by certain conventional fertilizers, and it actively accumulates in the human kidneys and bones over a lifetime. Furthermore, you are drastically lowering your exposure to synthetic pesticides.
Again, trace levels.
Trace levels that add up. Studies have repeatedly linked prolonged pesticide exposure to severe risks in fetal development and increased rates of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. When a parent pays that 53% premium on strawberries, they aren't buying a luxury item. They are purchasing a sensible biological insurance policy for their child's developing neurological system.
Okay, well, biological insurance implies a proportionate reduction in actual risk, and that is exactly where the argument falters for me. The EPA establishes maximum residue levels, or MRLs, for all approved pesticides.
Right.
And the USDA's pesticide data program continuously tests our food supply. And the vast majority of conventional produce falls not just slightly below, but magnitudes below these safety limits. The core tenet of toxicology is that the dose makes the poison.
But a safe dose for a fully grown adult might not be a safe dose for a developing fetus.
And the MRLs specifically account for vulnerable populations, including infants and children, with built-in safety buffers. Finding a trace microscopic amount of a synthetic pesticide on a conventional grape does not automatically translate to a toxicological threat to a child.
I disagree that it's just harmless, though.
Well, the human liver routinely processes natural plant toxins, compounds the plants produce themselves to ward off insects that are far more abundant in our diets than these synthetic residues. To frame conventional produce as a cumulative debt of toxicity ignores the incredibly stringent toxicological evaluations that these chemicals undergo before they are ever sprayed on a field.
But those toxicological evaluations often look at chemicals in isolation. They test one chemical at a time. They do not adequately test the cumulative cocktail effect of consuming multiple different trace residues, interacting together every single day over an 80-year lifespan.
That's a theoretical risk, though.
It's a biological reality. But look, because the individual clinical benefits of antioxidants and trace residues are so hotly contested between us, we really need to move the debate to the broader macro impact. Even if you argue the apple is functionally identical for the person eating it, the way it was grown has fundamentally different consequences for the earth. Does the organic premium subsidize a healthier planet?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
The environmental halo surrounding organic farming is largely a mirage, and it really comes down to a debate between land sparing and land sharing. Think about the biological mechanism of how these farms operate. Conventional farming uses synthetic nitrogen.
Right.
Think of synthetic nitrogen like an IV drip of pure plant steroids. It forces rapid, immense hypergrowth. Organic farming relies on compost and manure, which is more like the plant eating a complex carbohydrate. It takes time for the soil web to break it down, which naturally limits the speed and size of the harvest.
Which is exactly what causes the yield gap you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Because organic avoids that IV drip, it suffers a 19 to 25% yield gap. Think about it like a factory. If a manufacturer told you they were going to expand their factory's physical footprint by 84%, bulldozing the surrounding forest, just to manufacture the exact same number of cars they were building before, you would call that an environmental disaster.
Well, a farm isn't a factory.
The space required is the same concept. Because organic farms yield roughly a quarter less crop per acre, they require vastly more land to produce the same global caloric output. Conventional agriculture's high yields effectively spare land. They allow us to grow massive amounts of food on a smaller footprint, leaving other land wild and untouched to prevent deforestation.
Look, that factory analogy is structurally sound for understanding scale, but it assumes all land use is equally destructive, which just isn't true biologically.
How so?
Conventional agriculture doesn't just use a smaller footprint. It actively degrades and destroys the soil health within that footprint over time. That IV drip of pure plant steroids acts like a massive sugar rush for the plants, but it starves the symbiotic fungi and microbes in the dirt. It essentially sterilizes the microbial life. Organic farming, or land sharing, treats the farm as a living ecosystem.
But does treating it like an ecosystem justify requiring 84% more land globally?
It justifies the longevity and survival of the land itself. By relying on composting, cover crops, and green manure, organic farming forces the soil web to actively break down nutrients. In doing so, organic soils hold 26% more carbon.
Okay, carbon retention is good, yes.
It literally acts as a vital carbon sink against climate change. Furthermore, this spongy, living organic soil has 15 to 20% better water percolation. It absorbs rain rather than letting it run off, making the farm vastly more resilient to both droughts and flooding.
Sure, but
You can't just measure the physical square footage of the farm. You have to measure the vitality of the soil beneath it. Conventional agriculture relies heavily on fossil fuels to artificially synthesize that nitrogen fertilizer. Organic relies on the natural nitrogen cycle.
But the natural nitrogen cycle isn't inherently perfect or clean just because it's natural. I mean, organic farming relies heavily on animal manure for nitrogen, right?
Mostly, yes.
The mechanism of nutrient release from manure is highly dependent on unpredictable factors like soil temperature and moisture. A farmer applies manure, but the nitrogen might release at a time when the crop isn't actively growing to absorb it. What happens then?
Where does it go?
That excess nitrogen converts into nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas nearly 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Or it washes away into the local watershed, leading to a much higher eutrophication potential per unit of product.
Let's quickly define eutrophication so we're all on the same page.
Sure. Eutrophication is when excess nutrients run into a body of water, feeding massive algae blooms. The algae overpopulates, dies, and when it decomposes, it sucks all the oxygen out of the water, creating dead zones where fish and aquatic life can't survive.
Right. Dead zones.
Because organic manure's nutrient release isn't tightly controlled, it can severely damage aquatic ecosystems. Conventional farmers use precision synthetic nitrogen. They can apply the exact dose a plant needs exactly when it needs it, minimizing that runoff. So when you pay that organic premium, you are often subsidizing a system that is fundamentally less efficient with its nutrient management, not more.
I disagree that precision chemicals are ultimately better for the watershed than building deep, absorbent, carbon-rich soil that naturally filters water. But look,
This tension over how we manage and utilize land brings our discussion directly to the creatures living on it.
Animal welfare.
Yes, this is a crucial component of the organic premium that heavily drives up the cost of production. Ethical standards. When you buy conventional animal products, they are cheap because the system externalizes the costs of animal cruelty. But look at the newly implemented 2024 USDA Organic Livestock and Poultry Standards, the OLPS.
Which is a major reason why organic dairy and eggs are so expensive right now.
Exactly. The rule guarantees the absolute prohibition of gestation crates. These are metal cages so small a mother pig cannot even turn around during her entire pregnancy. It bans painful mutilations like the tail docking of cows, and it guarantees meaningful outdoor access for poultry, mandating 75% soil and vegetation cover, so birds can actually scratch, peck, and dust bathe as their biology dictates. You are paying for ethical production.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the actual timeline and the loopholes within those regulations? Yes, the OLPS rule made massive headlines in 2024, but if you look closely at the regulatory fine print, there is a 5-year compliance delay for the poultry industry.
A 5-year delay?
Yes, until 2029. That means the strict indoor and outdoor space requirements for chickens and egg-laying hens, which make up the vast majority of organic animal products consumed, do not fully take effect until the end of the decade.
Well, transitions take time.
True, but currently a consumer paying an 82% premium on organic eggs might still be buying from massive industrialized organic operations that barely meet the spirit of the law, keeping birds in massive barns with a tiny concrete porch that technically qualifies as outdoor access.
The trajectory is undeniably set, and the prohibition on gestation crates and mammalian mutilations is active right now. By paying the premium, consumers are sending a direct, powerful market signal that funds the transition away from factory farming.
I see that, but
Conventional standards are governed by industry self-regulation, which routinely uses incredibly high stocking densities and allows painful physical alterations without anesthesia. The organic premium ensures the animals are treated as living creatures rather than mere units of production. Furthermore, organic standards strictly prohibit the routine use of preventative antibiotics.
right.
Conventional farming relies on antibiotics constantly just to keep animals alive in crowded, unsanitary conditions, which is actively accelerating the global crisis of antibiotic resistance.
I don't disagree that animal welfare is a noble goal, and the reduction of routine antibiotics is a genuine public health benefit. But my strategic pushback here is that consumers simply do not need to pay the organic premium universally across their entire grocery cart to achieve a healthy, ethical diet.
Okay?
It's an exhausting financial burden. Instead of blindly accepting the premium on every single item, consumers should use a targeted, data-driven approach.
How so? Walk us through what that looks like. Give me an example of how a consumer navigates this without just defaulting to the organic label.
Take produce, for instance. You don't need to buy organic onions or avocados. The thick skins protect the edible parts. If you utilize the Clean 15 data, which tracks the conventional crops with the lowest pesticide retention, you'll find that nearly 60% of those samples show zero detectable pesticide residue. You can buy those conventionally and save your money.
And then focus the spending where it matters.
Exactly. If you only have an extra $5 to spend on organic this week, prioritize the organic premium strictly for the dirty dozen. These are thin-skinned items like strawberries, spinach, and peaches, which have very high residue retention.
That makes sense.
Additionally, you can utilize frozen organic produce. Because it's flash frozen at peak ripeness, it is often significantly cheaper than fresh organic produce, lasts longer, and is nutritionally equivalent or superior because it hasn't degraded while sitting on a truck for a week. By being strategic, you don't subsidize the inefficiencies of the entire organic supply chain. You just protect yourself where the data suggests it matters most.
I actually think that is a highly practical approach for families navigating a tight budget. It empowers the consumer to make smart choices. But to summarize my position on the broader system, I still maintain that the organic premium is a necessary market correction.
Fair enough.
It is the only widely available federally certified label that guarantees a verifiable reduction in toxic pesticide and heavy metal exposure. It actively promotes the restoration of soil health, it traps carbon, and it supports profound increases in biodiversity by working with the soil microbiome rather than sterilizing it. And with the new OLSP rules, it enforces rigorous animal welfare standards that conventional agriculture actively ignores in the pursuit of cheap output. When you pay that premium, you are investing in a food system that refuses to treat the earth, the animals, and our bodies as disposable.
And to summarize my perspective, while the intentions behind the organic movement are highly commendable, the blanket premium is steep and often entirely unjustified by the evidence. The marginal, clinically insignificant nutritional differences simply do not warrant a 50 to 80% price hike for the average family.
Right.
Furthermore, we cannot ignore the macro-environmental impact. Organic farming's lower yields and significantly higher land requirements present a massive, perhaps insurmountable hurdle to scaling this system globally. If we transition entirely to organic, we risk destroying millions of acres of wild habitat just to maintain our current global caloric output. Conventional farming, for all its flaws, gives us the intensive efficiency required to feed a growing planet without cutting down the remaining forests.
It is fascinating how we arrive at different systemic conclusions based on the exact same data, though I note we do find significant points of convergence.
We do.
We both acknowledge the shared value in strategic data-driven shopping. Utilizing things like frozen organics, focusing your spending on the dirty dozen, or, prioritizing organic dairy to get that vastly improved omega-3 profile makes sense to maximize your budget.
Absolutely. And I think we both emphatically agree that the most critical baseline for human health is simply consuming a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Whether that apple is organic or conventional, eating it is infinitely better for you than eating a highly processed snack. The benefits of basic produce consumption vastly outweigh the nuances of how it was grown.
Well said. There is clearly much more to explore within the complexities of agricultural science, soil biology, and consumer economics. The choices we make at the grocery store echo across the entire supply chain, and it's up to you, the listener, to weigh the evidence and decide how you want to cast your vote at the checkout counter.
It's a highly complex landscape, and the science is constantly evolving.
So the next time you are standing in that produce aisle, holding those two seemingly identical apples, one for $1 and one for $1.50, ask yourself, what exactly are the hidden costs of the cheaper one? And what kind of future are you buying with the premium? Thank you for listening.